Welcome also from my side. I'm Taube. I'm working for the Green European Foundation, and very honored to be here, with a big thank you also to the Budapest Forum organizers and to my panelists today here with us and also online. I was also here yesterday and listening to a lot of the sessions. Something that came up a lot to me, maybe unsurprisingly, is how to build and maintain sustainable democracies, of course bringing people to vote and not having them stay at home, and also giving them an offer to vote, giving them a reason to go, and an offer that is also has a potential to fight populist and extreme right messages. And in that sense, our panel, Tomorrow's Europe, Replacing Energy at the Center of the European Political and Democratic Project, is central. And definitely in the EU's energy project can be exactly an anchor to give these positive messages and a positive narrative, positive European projects to citizens, and also bringing them to vote. Energy is the core of our societies and also a sort of common good all over the EU. It is part of our common future as Europeans. It also has very far-reaching consequences in terms of energy security, but also security more broadly, as well as sustainability, the social equity of our societies, and the democracy aspects. And it is in that context that at the Green European Foundation we also work on the future of the EU's energy project, and that we have the panelists today here with us discussing the topic. Some of our panelists are also experts working with the Green European Foundation on the topic. So in any case, if you are interested in what we are discussing today, you can be in touch with us or with anyone from the Green European Foundation. And without much further ado, I will now turn to the experts. I hope Jessie is also with us online, because I don't see her. She's not. Okay, then I will at this moment go for the ones that are in the room. And I would like you all to share your thinking with us on this very broad but also very important topic running up to the next EU mandate. We do need this energy project of the EU to step up and to indeed to bring this narrative and to bring people to vote. So I want to ask you, if you look into EU in the future, in 2030, say, the end of the next Commission, the end of the next Parliament, where do you want the energy project to be, and how can it improve on both social, or not both, on social energy security, sustainability, and also on the democratic aspects? So Benjamin, do you want to kick off?
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for the invitation to share our views on this quite important topic. So my name is indeed Benjamin Denis. I'm representing IndustriAll Europe, which is a European trade union federation representing workers from the industry, extractive industry, textile, chemical industry, energy, and manufacturing industries. When I'm asking that question to our members are 180 trade union organizations coming from 40 European countries, EU member states, but also non-EU European countries. They basically tell us that what is key to decarbonize the EU economy as we should, as we must, is social acceptance. Social acceptance is and must be seen as one of the key pillars of the decarbonization agenda. And for us, social acceptance means first and foremost to put employment, jobs, at the top of the policy agenda. Putting employment at the top of the agenda means caring about how we will keep and create good industrial jobs in Europe with an adequate industrial policy. An industrial policy cannot just be a blank check to clean tech investors to bypass collective agreements, to bypass existing environmental and sustainable legislations. A sound industrial policy must be linked with strong conditionalities, starting with social conditionalities. We want good jobs to be created when an investor gets a series of advantages, including public money from member states' money, state aids, or from the EU budget. Putting employment at the top of the agenda also means caring about just transition. How do we get to the decarbonization agenda? How do we ensure that all the regions, all the workers, all the sectors will contemplate the shift to a decarbonized economy in a positive way? To do that, we need a much stronger framework to anticipate change. We see that the Fit for 55 package is also already bringing the EU economy in unprecedented territories, uncharted territories. The pace of decarbonization is dramatically accelerating, but we see that in many sectors, in many member states, we currently lack the resources, the institutional and the legal framework we need to bring workers at the table to discuss how to anticipate change, how to discuss with management, with employers, what decarbonization means for workers in terms of number of jobs that will be created or destroyed, in terms of the impact on work organization, the impact on health and safety requirements, the impact on skills, training, retraining requirements. All these things are at the DNA of the industrial relations system. If we do not put decarbonization on the agenda of industrial relations, workers will be on the menu, but workers want to be at the table. I just have the time to pitch the ideas, but those of you that are interested can consult and download our Just Transition Manifesto from our website. It's available in, I think, 6 or 7 European languages. I didn't double check for Hungarian, but I should have. Please consult, share this document. We also believe that social acceptance will also depend on the ability of member states to provide the investments that are at scale with the decarbonization challenge. And to be able to do that, we need to open a series of conversation. In terms of macroeconomic governance, I don't know if you have seen that, but a recent report of the New Economic Foundation shows that only 4 in 27 member states currently have the fiscal space to deliver the investments that are needed to be in line with the 1.5 target. It also means EU budgets, energy poverty, just transition. All these issues that are crucial to build social acceptance behind the Green Deal require massive investment, and it must partly come from the EU budget. Keeping in mind that some of the funds that are already existing depend actually on the Next Generation EU, the RRF, and that beyond 2026-2027 we will have a cliff in terms of the amount of climate finance available. And last but not least, and I will finish by that, when we meet people at the shop floor, Works Council representatives, ground floor trade unionists, they always tell us, okay, we accept that we need to quickly decarbonize, but what about the global action? What about what's going on in the other countries? And we insist a lot on the fact that, of course, we have the common but differentiated responsibility. Of course, there are a series of co-benefits related to decarbonization that shouldn't be overlooked in terms of job creation, in terms of air quality, and so on and so forth. But if the EU is among the very few countries that do what is needed to stick to the Paris Agreement objective, we will not make it. The EU only represents a little bit less than 10% of the CO2 emission, even though you double that number because you want to take into account the carbon footprint of the European way of life. It's absolutely obvious that EU alone will not make it. We need at least to bring all major economies on, if not exactly the same pace, at least they need to implement decarbonization policies that are in line with the Paris Agreement objectives.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Because we are a bit short on time, I will immediately go to Rosa and then Eero, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. My point here, or what I think that the European Union should take into account for the next term, is stressing that energy is not only a question of a matter of policy and regulation, it's overall a political matter. And we should talk about politics and how we approach this enormous and huge transformation we are facing. So first of all, energy should be a European vision, or we should have a European vision of the energy transition, not just a negotiation between different member state visions of the energy transition, which is happening right now. We are seeing how the electricity market reform is being discussed and agreed between France and Germany, same as industrial policy, and the rest of the countries has not the possibility or are not in the same terms to put forward the specificities. For instance, why Spain should export electricity instead of having European green industry in their territory, or why Serbia should only export lithium while they could benefit of having some of the added value processes linked to lithium. So, in my opinion, energy transition should be part of the cohesion European policy, as well as a tool to reduce inequalities. And we are in Hungary, and we know that Eastern Europe have certain specificities as the same we have in the Southern Europe, and these territorial particularities, historical questions, different approach and situations energy should be taken into account in the European energy policy. And when talking into territorial, we can go into the micro thing. The same as big areas, big regions should also benefit. We are seeing the same opposition in small communities. Rural areas, why we should have the big renewable project if we are not going to benefit from it. And this brings us to the question, the key question of the energy transition is a fair distribution of cost and benefits. Who is going to benefit the most of the transition and who is going to pay for it? If we don't ensure that every single individual, household, company, territory benefit from the transition, and we only have the perception that big companies are the ones benefiting from this technological shift, we will fail, as Benjamin was saying, in having social acceptance, but also we will have a political problem. Why? We need public leadership. We are in a moment that populism is arising. Political disaffection is arising across Europe. People don't trust politicians. If we don't have a public leadership that really leads the transition, we really defend the energy as a common good, as a common interest, making that we achieve and we reach all the targets for climate, social dimension, democracy and security, having a whole vision of the energy transition and not just having an energy transition led by the market, which is we haven't now. This means planning in terms of target, investment, objectives, but also compensation and redistribution policies. And this is at the whole of democratic and European project if we don't fail to introduce political aspects, political dimensions in our policies, regulations, etc., I'm sure that we will fail and we will not be any way of changing our energy system.
Maybe I can continue. So I'm Eero Yrjö-Koskinen, working for the European Environmental Policy Institute, and answering to Taube's initial question on how could we improve the current European energy system, I would look at the bottlenecks that we are currently facing. And clearly there are two issues there that should be developed if and when we are focusing and investing in increasing renewable energy. We need to improve our grids, both within the member states but also between the member states, so that we can distribute the electricity produced properly. At the moment it doesn't take place, at least offshore windmills are very often facing a challenge in this respect. But the other issue relates to energy storage capacities, because of course when you do increase renewable energy production, there are ups and downs in the production, and thereby you need better energy storage for that purpose. All that requires also public investments. Coming from Finland, though, this is not only about costs. These are investments for the future, which have now materialized in increased interest within municipalities to have these big windmill parks invested in remote areas, because they produce regular and constant income to the municipalities who are currently facing decreased industrial production and also reduced population. So these are maybe the two issues that I would raise regarding the energy system. And then coming to the four dimensions: security, sustainability, equity, and democracy. How can we improve them? Benjamin already mentioned the social aspect. We all recall the yellow vest movement, the Gilets jaunes in France, which basically mobilized the whole country and led to major disruptions of the whole society. In order to avoid those situations, I think that we need the introduction of special tariffs for certain consumer groups who are in vulnerable situation in case of energy price increases, or on the other hand, the drop of energy production, which has also an impact on energy prices. And then finally, there's the issue about producing these critical raw materials, which at the moment come mainly from China and some other third countries. As you know, the European Commission has suggested that there should be further emphasis on national production within Europe to produce these minerals and metals needed for windmills and photovoltaic issues, and that is something that of course would require proper environmental and social impact assessments in our member states, so that our people, municipalities, but also other livelihoods are properly consulted of these plans before exploration and mining operations start. Then there's a further element related to nature conservation. As you know, there is the Natura 2000 network already in place in all member states. These are conservation areas that have been set up for future generations to conserve natural beauty, basically, but also biodiversity. And of course, these are also areas that might be challenged by the mining industry and governments if they are at the same time interesting deposits in those fields. So I definitely think that Natura 2000 areas should be left out of these plans, and only in very exceptional cases should they be reconsidered. And finally, regarding partnerships with external countries, such as third countries that are at the moment producing these critical raw materials, we would need to develop some kind of solidarity, same kind of approach that we want to implement in our member states, in order to make sure that we don't neo-colonize them again in search for these raw materials. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eero. Jessie, can you hear us? Okay, then I will first go now to Jessie and then Stéphane. Did you hear the intro? So all of our panelists here already gave their take on how the EU's future energy project should look like by the end of next mandate, looking at all the dimensions, being social, sustainability, energy security, and the democracy dimension. If you could also give your opening statement, that would be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Taube. I'm very sorry not to be with you in Budapest. It looks beautiful. Hi, everyone. Let me start with seconding Rosa's point that we need a European vision of the energy transition. And I know there are issues with Article 94 of the treaty, but there is room for a European consensus vision here. And the nature of the clean energy transition should make that easier. Yes, different countries have different histories and different starting points with the energy system, but we are all moving towards the same big changes. A focus on energy efficiency, a focus on renewables deployment, including grids, the electrification of energy use, and of course, a need to do this in balance with protection of nature and with a fair social deal on energy. And it was very helpful if there was a more coherent, a consensual European approach. It will help the clean energy industry, and we need them. They are going to, some of them big, some of them new startups, they are going to build the clean energy system, most of it. And it's very difficult to be in that business field without clear direction in Europe, with all the uncertainties, differences, stop-starts. We would be much, much more effective and efficient in our transition if the direction was clear. I would say, I think, 5 very short things, Taube, about the social dimension, the just transition here. The first thing is, it's complicated. The example of the Gilets jaunes is mentioned. And when I've spoken to French political friends who have looked at this very closely, it's clear that in a sense, the tax on diesel was blamed for, was the final extreme addition problems to a much bigger set of problems. And it was summarized by a French friend as, a carbon tax on diesel is okay if I can afford accommodation in the center of the city where I work, and I only drive 10 kilometers per week. But if I am priced out of the city and I'm driving 70 kilometers per day to work, this is very important. This is not about a carbon tax, it's about the availability of affordable housing where people want to work. So the issues are interlinked, and I think we who work in the energy field need to be very aware of that. The second thing is preferential or special tariffs were mentioned. I would like to be really ambitious here and say that there should be a basic level of electricity that we could move towards being either very, very low tariff for everyone or even free. And we can learn some things from other parts of the world which are having these discussions as they build up access to energy in much, much poorer economies. How do you afford that? You charge much higher prices for big consumers. So a small household with a very modest electricity consumption has a very, very low subsidized tariff, because a large household that's heating a swimming pool using electricity is paying a much higher tariff, not just for the added electricity, but for all the electricity they consume. And there is a history of these sorts of things being done in the past, also in Europe. I'm thinking of Italy in the 2000s. Let's go back to exploring some of those possibilities. In a global perspective, I was on a discussion earlier this week with countries in the Global South about carbon markets. And there were a number of European experts on the call, and they were pushing us really hard, saying, how are you using the revenues from the carbon market and the revenues that will come in from the carbon border adjustment mechanism to address the social aspects of the energy transition? And they were not impressed by our European answers, and I think they were right. The Social Climate Fund is a good start, and it's good that it gives some possibility for member states to help with energy prices, but is mainly focused on helping people finance new energy infrastructure. So not just keep paying for energy, but actually change energy consumption through different equipment. This is a good start, but it's not yet a successful package, certainly in the eyes of the rest of the world. 2 last ones. Heat is one of the biggest challenges, as we know, for a lot of Europe, also in Hungary. And here I am very puzzled by the lack of interest at EU level in Brussels and the lack of interest of national governments in the role of geothermal energy. Renewable, but totally reliably baseload, a wonderful way to do heating in dense urban areas. Cities are super interested in geothermal and works for many, many years. It produces steady revenues, it produces low prices. It's an excellent solution. Challenge is it's capital expensive. And At the moment, we have a situation on the ground in Europe where rich cities are moving to geothermal, Malmo, Munich, and poorer cities are not in a position to do this. This seems to me an obvious thing for us to address at European level with some of the redistribution instruments we have available, if we're ambitious. And then the last
Jessie?
one, not so relevant to Hungary.
I'm maybe
just to say,
I'm maybe
Go on,
gonna come back to you for the last one, as we are pushing time a little bit, and then we go for the last one on the next session or on the next round of questions. But thanks already a lot for all of the input. I will now go to Stéphane for your opening remark, and then we will do a round again of everyone.
Thanks, Taube. You asked us for a pitch, and I want to pitch for sufficiency, because I believe that this is the missing leg of European energy and climate policy, and that it answers all the aspects, the 4 dimensions that you've covered. But probably most of you don't know what sufficiency is. Sufficiency was defined by the IPCC in last year's AR6 report as a set of measures and daily practices that avoid the demand for energy, materials, land and water, while delivering human well-being for all within planetary boundaries. So it's not just about energy. Actually, sufficiency is much broader than this, but it definitely has something to do with services. And it implies an environmental ceiling. There is a level to which we need to adjust the nature and the amount of the services to keep demand to a level which is within these planetary boundaries, but also a social foundation which implies that everyone could or should fulfill their needs for services to live a decent life. At NégaWatt, we are a French think tank who've been working on sufficiency for 20 years in France now, integrating it in our energy transition scenarios and in our policy recommendations. This has led to the French government integrating this in 2015 in French law. And we've also been now working on this, taking this issue up to the European level with a few research projects. We've just published in June a scenario called Clever for a collaborative low energy vision for the European region, which we have built bottom up with a lot of players from NGO and academia around Europe, including Hungary, with the Environmental Planning and Education Network, and we base that work on exchanges with REC. And we've just published 30 scenarios, including a scenario for Hungary, which is sufficiency-based, but of course sufficiency plus combined with efficiency and renewables. And the result for Europe is that if Europe goes for this implementation of sufficiency, efficiency and renewables, we can do without new nuclear and CCS. I guess this is an issue here in Hungary. We believe that these are risky technologies and that if we can do without, we should do without, so we can go for a 100% renewable energy system. We can also get Europe completely independent out of all forms of energy imports by 2050. We don't call for an autark Europe, we just call for Europe which chooses its partnership, which chooses its dependencies, and we don't think depending on hydrogen imports is a good idea for Europe. And of course, because of this, we also achieve a Europe which is more resilient to shocks. By decreasing the size of an energy system, of course, we are decreasing risks. We also, of course, increase the decentralized aspects of things by going for local renewables, but also because sufficiency is very much a local authorities question. And we're here in Budapest, there is already experience in Budapest with this. A sufficiency, efficiency, renewables approach can also lower the pressure on material resources. This was mentioned by Eero, of course, for the same reason. If you decrease the size of your energy system, you also decrease the need to develop the grids and therefore the need for copper, and the same goes for lithium for batteries. Finally, sufficiency can make Europe fairer. In our scenario, we have a situation whereby Hungary in 2050 is at a consumption level per capita which is close to that of Germany and France, whereas today it's lower, because of that environmental ceiling, there is space in the sufficiency concept to catch up and to leave enough space for everyone to get to decent levels. And of course, this also, we think, can improve the acceptance of the transition by delivering on a fair society and also by minimizing the issue of grids development and of generally of infrastructure development. Finally, we think this is the only way to still keep Europe in a 1.5 compatible trajectory and a fair share for Europe of that trajectory. And the only way to make this possible for Europe is to go, again, through ambitious EU target setting. There is a discussion popping up in Europe around 2040 targets, and there is consensus also coming from our findings that 90% in 2040, minus 90% net reductions is the minimum, and we are calling for 2045 neutrality. There is also a need to go for final energy consumption reduction targets, leaving space for sufficiency policies next to efficiency, so a savings target and not an efficiency target anymore. And sufficiency in general, we believe, should come at the forefront of European energy and climate policy making. That implies mainstreaming it into sufficiency policies. We're calling on the Commission and European institutions and on the Greens and on all the players to take this up into European elections and to make this really an agenda for a new social contract for Europe.
Great, thank you so much, Stéphane. I want to come back to Rosa. So you made the case about the energy project also being really a political project. And politics is about elections, is about political parties, but it's also about public participation. Where do you see this standing at this point in the European decision-making, and how can it be improved to get the voice of the citizens, also of the cities, from all over the EU, more into the EU policy-making processes?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. And yeah, I think it's a European problem. All our countries has a deficit of public participation in all policies and process, and big challenge. But I think that when we come to energy transition or ecological transition, it's really important to have people on board, because it's such big transformation that people need to feel they are part of it. We need to involve people. We need to make more control of the process by increasing civil society participation or unions, making a space for dialogue, for hearing, for understanding what are the resistance, what can I do for make this acceptable. There is so much at the stake. I came back. We are seeing how populism is rising in Europe, and we see how transition policies are part of the cultural war and are weaponized politically. And if we need to make people that understand they are part of it and part of the decisions, because otherwise they will find an explanation, a conspiranoid explanation of why these things are doing it. And we can hear how these global elites policies are, and yeah, we are living, as I said before, an era of disaffection and mistreating politicians, and we need to bring people there. Of course, this is difficult, especially at European or national level. We have some experiments in climate assemblies, but it works very, very well at local level. When we have, for instance, a renewable project to be developed in a community, if we involve the community in designing the process, on hearing their demands to co-design the project and compensate them, the opposition reduces. Another good example, the just transition process in the coal regions in Spain. Every community has their dialogue space with unions, with local stakeholders, with people to define which kind of project they would like to have an alternative to coal. This brings the community on the process, bring the acceptance. In cities, when we have low emission zones discussed, negotiated with people, they are more accepted, low emission zone or any urban mobility. And this is important because many times we talk, and I finish with that, when we talk about just transition, we think of jobs, We also think in affordability or equity, but it's also this procedimental justice, participation and meet people. But again, participation is not enough by themselves. We need compensation and redistribution policy.
Thank you so much. On this note, I would maybe go back to Jessie, if you're still there. Jessie? Yes. Hey, I would like you to go further in the list and to give your fifth point, but also talking about the redistribution and compensation that Rosa was talking about. You mentioned the Social Climate Fund, and if you could see a way of improving that fund, because as we, I think, all know, it's quite small, and it will not address all the needs that are there at throughout the European member states. How do you see this project going forward, and what would be your sort of advice for the new EU institutions on the Social Climate Fund? Thank you.
Taube, you've sort of given us the answer there. The Social Climate Fund needs to be much larger if it's to address the scope of what we need to do. And it perhaps also, moving towards the earlier point about a European vision, needs to be both absolutely something that is subject to local priorities and decision-making, and guided firmly in the direction of helping us change to a clean energy infrastructure. Because making affordable the existing energy system is important this year, but it doesn't get us further in the transition, and it certainly doesn't get us to the kind of savings that we can achieve through the transition, which would then be lasting. So let's say the Social Climate Fund is in its version 1.0, and it needs explicitly to be tested, reviewed, upgraded, and certainly not sort of treated as something that has been solved in its current form. Let's treat it more as a sort of pilot project for the way forward at European level. So I would like to see a timeline for revisiting and growing and learning from the Social Climate Fund. Let me say something here on one concern. I have many friends who work in the energy part of the European Commission, and I think they do great work. However, since the energy crunch crisis, it's clear that DG Energy has become more and more focused on security of supply. And it's clear that the work on just transition has been less staffed, candidly. And talking to friends in the Commission, it's not clear that our full-time staff really focused on thinking through how we have socially equitable transition within Europe or supported by Europe in the rest of the world. So that would be the other big point, is let's not lose focus on that priority, and let's make sure that there are people putting time into it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessie. And on the last part, also the role of Europe in the rest of the world. Eero, you mentioned sort of, you called for a new sort of partnerships with the rest of the world. Could you elaborate on how those partnerships should look like?
Thank you. Yes, of course. I mean, this is something that could already be introduced through our free trade agreements with third countries. These are already on the table, and many of such aspects which relate also to social and environmental issues are nowadays taken on board by the European Commission when these discussions start. So it's not something out of the blue. It is already taking place, but of course now that we are facing increasing challenges with getting the critical raw materials, we should do that across the board with all those countries that are providing them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Benjamin, at some point we were discussing just transition in general, and you mentioned the concept of anticipation. Do you want to elaborate on that for our audience, please?
Yeah, when I started to work on those issues, when we discussed with our members what climate policies meant for them, or more broadly, the green transition. It was about greening the workplace, changing the light bulbs, putting parking for bikes in front of the workplace, and so on and so forth. Now, the discussion is completely different. It's about changing the plant in a decade maximum. So it's a completely different discussion. And the tools we have to steer that change in a socially fair way are completely inadequate. We have made some progress during the last 2 mandates of the Commission. We now have a Just Transition Fund, we have a Just Transition Platform, we have territorial Just Transition Pathways. Fair enough, this is a progress, this is something that we have to support and improve because it's not perfect. But it's fair to say that it has been designed for coal-based regions. It has been then a bit enlarged to take into account other sectors. But when we see now the scope, the pace of the decarbonization agenda, it's basically all the industrial sectors, many service sectors that are at stake, that will have to change their business model, that will have to change the skills profile of their workers, and so on and so forth, with new risks emerging in terms of health and safety. And what we see on the ground through the contact we have with our members that are at the shop floor, that are sitting in the works councils, is that for too many sectors, too many multinational companies, there is no, in a systematic way, anticipation of change through social dialogue with workers. We have a series of companies in the energy sector, notably in the automotive supply chain, that have announced site closures that will destroy thousands of employments overnight, without even respecting the existing rights to information and consultation of workers. So we need to change that, because we will not build the social acceptance of the Green Deal agenda if people are not involved and brought on board. And I fully agree with what Rosa said. It's crucial to involve people in the decision making, in the implementation of the Fit for 55 package and of the Green Deal. But it also means that democracy should be there at work, at the workplace. It's not just voting every 4 or 5 years for the European or national elections or the local elections. It's also on a daily basis being part of the conversation and the decision-making process where your daily life is at stake. And it starts at the shop floor level.
Thank you. I will now pose a last question to Stéphane, and then we'll open the floor for questions, so please start thinking about it. And I think we will have room for 2 or 3 questions. Stéphane, so you mentioned, of course, the case for sufficiency, and I think it's very well made, and I think it's also very well understood, because it's such a clear offer. But how do you see, or where do you see potential levers at the European policy and institutional level to also maybe make that happen, or at least have some direction from the EU level to also the member states on sufficiency?
Well, you said it's very well understood, but I think the concept still needs a lot of understanding and framing and visibility, and this is what we're trying to do at NégaWatt with quite a few players around in Brussels at the moment. It needs also to be distinguished for some concepts which are a bit competing with it, such as behavioral changes. And a lot of people and players, and you can hear people hiding against behavior, hiding behind behavioral changing, saying, well, people don't want to change their behaviors, so this will just remain an adjustment measure in scenario building and policy making. But when you really frame sufficiency the way we do it as changes in infrastructures, investments in infrastructures and policies so that societies can evolve, then citizens do want it. And this is what was shown. You mentioned the citizens' assemblies in Europe around, particularly the West. Unfortunately, there weren't citizens' assemblies in the East. Our German partners did some analysis in all the citizens' assemblies around the West of Europe. Sufficiency measures made up 40% of the proposals from citizens. So citizens want it when it is the real fair sufficiency, and not the asking consumers to change their behaviors the way Jesse mentioned, like the yellow vests. So there is really a potential beyond sufficiency for a societal project that goes beyond energy, that has to do possibly with a new deal for Europe that can bring torn societies together. And there needs to be a democratic debate when I define the lower ceiling and the upper ceiling and the lower. This is a democratic debate. What is the upper ceiling and what is the lower foundation? And if the parties take this up into the European election, if there is a debate following the European election as to how we can integrate sufficiency broadly beyond just energy into climate and energy policies in Europe, the Commission will have to look at what they've done already, and they will have to really see that there is a possibility to address this in all sectors, including economic sectors. What does it mean for a company in Europe to develop businesses on the basis of quality and on the basis of customer relationship rather than just developing markets and more markets. So there is a real potential, I feel and I hope, around these European elections, and also integrating this in the next energy and climate governance so that it comes back then to the national and the local level, that this thinking is forced through the European processes so that local authorities can continue to do what they're already doing in a lot of them in Europe on this.
Thank you so much. I will now open the floor for questions. Please be concise. And also, if you want to pose a question to a specific member of the panelists, let us know. I have first Sir here and then Benedek behind you. Do we have microphones in the room? There's someone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for leaving me the floor, and thank you to the panelists for what was very interesting panel and discussion. I work for United Nations, so maybe it's from my specific vantage point, I would like to open a bit the discussion. Eero mentioned very timely, I guess, the risk of being perceived as neocolonialist from developing country when it comes to rare earths and the critical mineral resources, in a moment in which precisely we need to maximize our capacity for multilateral cooperation between countries which are different and which, as recognized by international environmental law, face differentiated common but differentiated responsibility when it comes to climate mitigation, for example. Now, my question is for Eero, but for all the panel, I guess, in this context, what do you think about the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Measure, which just entered into force, and which, of course, entails huge cost for developing country under the umbrella of reducing carbon leakage. But of course, the impact on developing country has been perceived as high, as these guys protectionism in the WTO, Indonesia, Egypt, a plethora of countries are challenging European Union for this measure. And of course, this, along with the law on deforestation, for example, can be perceived as a signal of neo-unilateralism, which is the last thing that we need, I guess, if we are to build and to provide a global public good as mitigation of climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take also the question of Benedek already, who's just behind. And then...
Yeah, thank you. I have two quick questions. First is about an aspect which was not so much elaborated in the panel, is the democracy aspect of the energy project. And of course, the neocolonialist approach is already talking about democracy aspects globally, but we also have an internal democracy aspect, and beyond the participation of the citizens in the decision-making project, and that's simply the power balance between producers and consumers. And now the energy system is based on the assumption that there are big energy producer companies and there are dependent consumers. With renewable energy, this is changing, and consumers are becoming prosumers or producers. But how the EU could better support this shift towards a more balanced and more democratic systemic energy structure in Europe, where this unbalance between the producers and consumers can be shifted towards a more balanced and more democratic system. And the other question is about how to make energy question more political on the European level, because I agree that this is something crucial for the future of Europe, and I think that this could be treated like that on the European level. the fundamentals of the European Union is in the steel and coal community and the Euratom Treaty. So we started with energy. What about restarted or to continue or to update the EU with energy, with the new General Energy Treaty, or really to put energy in the heart of the European discussion and the European project?
Thank you. I think we maybe start now with these two questions because there's quite some material in there. Eero, do you want to come in first?
Yes, thank you. Regarding the first question on the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, which has entered into force now as of October this year, I think it is welcome because otherwise there's a great risk that European industries start outsourcing their production to third countries where the level of environmental and also social sustainability is not the same. So we definitely need this kind of mechanism, but I understand the concerns of these third countries that are at the moment facing this situation. Fortunately, we are now in an intermediary phase where these countries and producers need to just report on the carbon impacts of their production and their goods that they're trying to export to the internal market. But this intermediary phase, without any costs, will end in 2026. As from then, there will be fees included. And that, of course, by that time, I hope that the European Union and the European Commission would have been able to provide them also assistance in developing their own production and take these into consideration. So this is my first reaction to that question. And then regarding Benedek Javor's inquiry on how to promote renewable energy production within the member states, I think one of the ways could be to provide examples that we are already having from some other countries. Well, again, coming from Finland, I know my own country's situation. Having invested during the past decade quite massively in the production of renewable energy, we are now in a situation where Finland is receiving massive investments from international corporations because they are looking for carbon-free electricity and also, of course, stable production circumstances. But this is maybe just one example that making these investments now will, at the end of the day, also have positive financial impacts on the country's economies. Thank you.
I will maybe just give the last word to Rosa to maybe answer the democracy part of Benedek's question.
Yes, yes, it's true that renewable technology allows to really have a more distribution generation and open the floor for new stakeholders. But still we should be honest and acknowledge that we will still need big investment for the amount of energy we consume in Europe. So that's I came back to the public leadership. Public institutions need to control, to regulate and watch out the investment and watch out these big companies, these big projects, what are their priorities. And this comes for a shift, in my opinion, very briefly, from the idea of consumers to citizens. This means that energy shift from being a commodity to a right. If we do this shift, then we have public institutions, public administration fully controlling, fully deciding this private, enormous private funding that we need, we must acknowledge that, what are the services for?
Thank you. I have a request for a final remark on CBAM on my right.
No, I can only support what has been said on CBAM. I'm not sure that CBAM is the biggest challenge for industries in the global south. I mean, I think that the overcapacity in China is maybe a bigger threat than CBAM. But I do believe that indeed we have to use the opportunity of this interim period we are in and the review mechanism which is foreseen in the CBAM legislation to maybe explore ways to compensate the possible impact of CBAM on industry in some countries of the of the global south. There might be solutions to explore in terms of support of tech transfer, providing targeted fund to decarbonize some industries. These are things that could be explored to indeed avoid to give the impression that we are imposing in a neo-colonial way our own agenda to other countries.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you to all of the panelists, all of the people also in the audience. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions, but as we said in the beginning, feel free to be in touch with either of us, and have a good continuation of the day. And thanks again to the Budapest Forum.